As one of only 3 Liberal Democrat MPs who didn't vote for the coalition, I'm clear that we shouldn't be closing the door on a future coalition with the Labour Party. But I think I should start by questioning whether there could have been a coalition with Labour this time after they've been in power since 1997. Here in the North West, you could be forgiven for thinking that a coalition between the Lib Dems and Labour was impossible, given the hostility between the two parties. In the past, in Greater Manchester, for example, the Labour Party has done deals with the Tories in places like Rochdale and Oldham to keep the Lib Dems out. And no one would ever suggest that there was a love-in here in the city of Manchester between the Lib Dems and Labour, or, for that matter, down the East Lancs Road in Liverpool. Even the wrong side of the Pennines, in places like Sheffield, where David is, the competition between the two parties makes it very difficult for us to be in coalition together. Here in Manchester, during the general election, Labour ran a pretty tough negative campaign against me, and both parties ran fairly hard-hitting campaigns throughout the North West, which could hardly help in cementing a coalition agreement between the two parties after the election. In the North West, neither party pulls any punches. But despite all of this, a coalition deal with Labour was never ruled out. Compare that to 1997, when it was made abundantly clear that no deal would or could be done to prop up the Tories. In 2010, despite there being a general acceptance amongst the public that Gordon Brown needed to go, a deal with Labour wasn't ruled out. This probably actually cost us a few seats where the Tories ran the Vote Lib Dem Get Labour message, in the same way that the Vote Lib Dem Get Tory message worked in several Labour-facing seats. So even when Labour were massively unpopular, the Lib Dems were prepared to talk to Labour about a possible coalition. Even though the arithmetic made it difficult, I do actually think a deal could have been done. It would have needed the support of the nationalists, and we did actively seek talks with Labour as well as with the Conservatives about a possible coalition. And I'm very clear the parliamentary party did not want to shut the door on discussions with Labour. I would say in policy terms, we are much closer to Labour on many issues, and our common ground with the Tories tends to be where we fundamentally disagree with Labour, where Labour have actually, in the last few years, moved off the progressive agenda on civil liberty issues like ID cards and child detention. I think after the election, the real problem with Labour was Labour's refusal to entertain meaningful discussions. Senior figures like David and John Reid were pretty clear and pretty determined that a deal shouldn't be done, whatever David might have said earlier, and they actively tried to stop it. And I think it's fair to say that Labour's negotiating team weren't prepared to accept any sort of compromise and recognise that 7 million people had voted Lib Dem, and the Lib Dems needed to have a voice in any coalition agreement. I suppose in many ways I don't actually blame Labour for refusing to strike a deal, despite getting only 29% of the vote compared to the Lib Dems' 23%. They managed to win over 250 seats compared with our 57. Being in opposition from a relative position of strength, if you compare the position of the Labour Party now with the Tory position in 97, is an easy option, and I suppose that's politics for you. But because there was a genuine desire to consider cooperation with Labour, and that's despite the fact that there were any number of good reasons not to have that deal. But because we were prepared to consider a deal with Labour, I think that does leave the option of a coalition open for the future. But I think for it to happen, Labour do need to change their attitudes and become less tribal. At the same fringe meeting that was held at our party conference, David Lammy acknowledged the fact that the Labour Party was becoming more tribal, and that some people think that Labour are being too aggressive towards the Lib Dems. But there is plenty of common ground between the two parties, whether it be on the environment, Europe, equality or social policy. But I do think that Labour have to accept that there's got to be some compromises in the future. or at least to agree to disagree in the same way that the coalition agreement has allowed us to disagree on issues like tuition fees and nuclear power. I think if Labour are willing to accept a new kind of politics where voters do want the parties to work together, there is no reason why in the future there shouldn't be a coalition between us.
Okay, right, let's see how tribal you all are. I'm not going to say put out your hands, tribalists. I'll just take the first three. I'll take you, and then from there, and then the man at the back.
Thanks. Hi, Andy Michael. Is it switched on?
Yep.
I'm just going back to this idea of rational choice, the idea of the coalition being a rational choice, and everyone was saying about the idea of tone. I'm just wondering what you think on the Chris Huhne, Saeed Awarzi video horror show that was chucked out a couple of months ago, and to what extent the responsibility of people like yourselves is to actually be a critical voice for the coalition as much as your criticism of Labour being too critical of the Liberal Democrats. Where is that progressive critical voice? I'm a constituent of yours, John, and I get your pamphlets through regularly, and they seem to be very keen to laud the few successes that the coalition have made, but they seem very, very reluctant to criticise things such as free schools or the rolling out of academies or anything in that sense.
Right, thank you. Who is it next? There's a woman in the middle there.
My question is particularly to Evan and John. We're seeing this sort of most unprecedented attack on public services nationally and locally. You know, even Margaret Thatcher managed to achieve, and that's before the spending review. So the need for this Lib Lab coalition might come sooner than you think in terms of standing shoulder to shoulder to defend some of those services and protect some of the most vulnerable people in society. So will you do that?
Thank you. And the man at the back, Mike.